In the days before the internet or telephone, the only qualifications needed for a scam artist were the right clothes and a profound lack of scruples. No better example of mankind's pre-technological naivete was the hard and fast tale of Lord Gordon Gordon, one of history's boldest confidence men. Between 1869 and 1874, the scammer, also known as Lord Glencairn, managed to use his foreign persona and endless charm to swindle the wealthy and trusting in a spree of duplicity spanning from Europe to North America. And since he spun a bigger web of lies than a black-suited Spider-Man, historians know very little about this globe-trotting grifter. Let's see what we can unravel. But before we do that, be sure you subscribe to this channel. Around 1869, a self-proclaimed wealthy Scottish landowner by the name of Lord Glencairn began making a great deal of upper-class acquaintances. It didn't take long for the supposed nobleman to begin borrowing money in increasingly larger sums. Claiming to be the descendant of ancient kings, the man employed a young valet to accompany him while dressed in garish outfits, including but not limited to buckskin breeches and a giant cockade upon his hat. Using his connections and appearance, Glencairn was able to establish credit with jewelers in both Edinburgh and London. And by 1870, having racked up an estimated total of $100,000, the so-called aristocrat fled to America, presumably leaving a trail of bedazzled children's clothing in his wake. That's right, the very next stop on this trickster's tour happened in 1871 when the Scottish scammer resurfaced in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Dressed in hard-to-miss and expensive clothes, Gordon drew attention to himself by making a large bank deposit immediately upon his arrival. Being a time before the internet, the sudden presence of a single rich and exotic newcomer immediately sparked interest from the city's bored elite, and soon enough, Gordon found himself attending countless dinners and picnics, otherwise known as the only fun things to do in the 1800s. Having no way to be fact-checked, Gordon used his accent and mysteriousness to hint at an exciting backstory where he was the heir to the Earls of Gordon as well as relative to Lord Byron. After all, who in Minneapolis was going to say otherwise? Even in 2019 money, $45,000 is a ton of money to spend on a single vacation, and Lord Gordon managed to get that and more, all for the low price of never going back to Minnesota. As his reputation had expanded in Minneapolis, Gordon crossed paths with Colonel John S. Loomis, the Land Commissioner of Northern Pacific Railroad. The self-proclaimed wealthy Scotsman expressed interest in buying land, something the colonel had just happened to be selling in order to fund a new railroad venture. Loomis took this totally not at all suspicious opportunity as serendipitous, offering his new friend a luxurious first-class trip to see the parcels of land he had for sale. This included a personal valet and all expenses paid. You can probably guess what happened next. After milking the colonel for all he offered, Gordon told his friends that he needed to travel back east to facilitate a money transfer, only to never set another snowy foot in Minnesota again. Reviled as one of the worst robber barons of the Gilded Age, the ruthless railroad developer Jay Gould had very few historical defenders. And so it's only fitting that his fate would intersect with the wily subject of our story. Gordon first arrived in New York in 1872, which happened to be the same time Jay Gould was fighting for control over the Erie Railroad. In an amazing act of boldness, the false lord managed to convince the millionaire developer that he was the cousin of a wealthy Scottish clan who owned a controlling interest in the company. In an attempt to gain his favor and control over the railroad, Gould bribed Lord Gordon with $1 million in stocks in exchange for giving up control. But since the defending foreigner actually had zero influence over the company, he opted to immediately sell his newly gifted investment and make off with the money instead. Now, rule number one of any grift is that once you've lied your way into $1 million, the smart move is to become a figurative ghost before ending up a literal one. Gordon's biggest mistake was not following his own pattern and for some bizarre reason opted to stay in New York even after his biggest swindle. Inevitably, this rookie move resulted in a lawsuit and arrest as the furious Jay Gould ironically sought justice for the con on his own illegal dealings. When the case was brought to trial, Gordon once again managed to charm both the courtroom and his prominent friends into posting his bail. The only person unconvinced? That would, of course, be Jay Gould, who began to personally research the various aristocrats in Europe whom Gordon had been using as references. But by the time he learned that none of them existed, the scam artist had already fled the country. In October of 1872, Fort Worth, Canada, was visited by a presumably exhausted and most likely giggling Lord Gordon, who immediately posed as a British tourist looking for sporting expeditions. Despite being only 50 miles north of Minnesota's border with Canada, the American fugitive managed to maintain a lifestyle of hunting trips and countryside relaxation for almost an entire year. That is until an incident in July of 1873 which brought his vacation to an abrupt end when Gordon was kidnapped from his own front porch and brought back to the border, all thanks to a $25,000 bounty placed on his head by none other than Jay Gould. Amazingly, the story doesn't quite end there. It turns out that you just can't go into other countries and steal people without consequence. And so before they could bring Gordon over the Canadian border and to justice, the American kidnappers were intercepted and arrested by the Northwest Mounted Police. Imprisoned without bail, this led to an international incident when Governor Horace Austin of Minnesota demanded the return of the kidnappers, even going so far as to ready the local militia for a possible invasion of Canada. The situation escalated all the way to President Grant and the Canadian Prime Minister, who successfully negotiated the release of the prisoners. As for Gordon, well, he remained in Canada as a free man, at least for the moment. As fun as Gordon's story is, you can only make the world your own personal Elmer Fudd for so long before it eventually catches up. This is exactly what happened when the still furious Jay Gould tracked down the Scottish jewelers once scammed by the then-named Lord Glencairn. Going through the proper legal channels, one said jeweler from Edinburgh used the courts to get an order for Gordon's extradition, and on the morning of August 1, 1874, the Canadian police finally arrived at his door. First awoken in his bedroom, Lord Gordon's first instinct was to ask the police if he could finish his nap. Sensing the obvious ruse for an escape, his request was denied. They did, however, allow the fugitive to grab his hat from another room before bringing him to prison. But it wasn't a hat he wanted, and after a brief struggle with the arresting officer, Lord Gordon had shot himself in the head. According to witnesses, it's unclear if this was intentional or merely a misfire during the skirmish. Either way, Lord Gordon, aka Lord Glencairn, passed away having never seen the inside of a jail cell for the grand total of all his scams. Along with his real name, Gordon took many things to his grave. The early life of this anonymous beguiler is known only in the form of rumors, more specifically that Gordon was the illegitimate son of a clergyman and a maid. By some accounts, his real name was Hubert Hamilton, although others contest that this was yet another alias. No one contests, however, that this infamous confidence man had an undeniably great taste in names. But there may be luck for those seeking the truth. In 2018, a librarian named Jenny McElroy was given a grant to research the background of Mr. Gordon. But even McElroy has expressed doubt she'd get to the bottom of things, and that's assuming she doesn't mysteriously disappear with all that grant money. What do you think of Lord Gordon? Good Lord Gordon or not good Lord Gordon? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other fine videos from our weird history.